This is ScoonTV, episode number 2, part 2 of my interview with Dr. Randy Short. Randy, the last time we spoke, we had brought up ADOS,
Mm,
which stands for African Descendants of Slaves. It's what I believe is a reparations movement,
mm.
and it entails more than money. Could you explain a little bit about what ADOS is really about from your understanding? Because you're not a part of ADOS, are you?
I'm not a formal part of ADOS, but I'm not anti many of the stated open objectives of ADOS. Now, the ulterior things and who's behind it and who's putting money and some of the personalities involved, we're not on the same page. And even the way that it's named, I wouldn't call the folks slaves. I would have said enslaved, and I would have probably named it African Indigenous American Descendants of Enslaved. It's more historically honest and realistic because I'll tell anyone that whole narrative, the way ADOS is framed, it's like the museum, the new African American History Museum, ignores the fact that many of us are of indigenous African descent. Okay, the Washita, there are various groups of people who were black here long before the European folks began bringing people that they had chained up and brought over from Africa. So ADOS at its core negates 5, 10,000 years of history, and it is very similar to what I would call the slave ship, and our history starts with slavery, that kind of narrative, which is both dishonest, false, and psychologically debilitating and damaging to people in this country.
You know, you bring up an interesting point. There are people who say that there were black people here in America prior to slavery, and it sounds like that's what you're saying.
Absolutely.
Are you referring to the Native Americans as indigenous Africans, or and what is the basis for this? Where's the proof of this?
There's a lot of different proof, but you have to understand that the reparations movement, as ADOS presents it, is not the full pie. All right. What am I saying? I'm saying that right now you can do DNA testing, but did you know that people who are Native American are discouraged from submitting DNA samples because they do not want to show that there's this African connection? So people who are waging a systematic fraud against the African Indigenous American population, such as Skip Gates. Nobody black has any Native American ancestry. That's the way that we all get put on the slave ship, and we're immigrants by force. We're forced migrants like everybody, and it's a way of saying we have no more right to be here than anyone else. That's a scam, okay? And you can go back and you can look. Ivan Van Sertima and other people have proven decades ago that the Spanish explorers and other people saw black people here. You can even go to some place as simple as Tuscaloosa, Alabama. What does Tuscaloosa mean? It means black warrior. Why did they name something for black warriors if they weren't black? Why were most of the people, for example, when Alabama was initially opened up to white settlement, you can go to Talladega, there's a little monument near Talladega College, University, for the black man who was the interpreter that knew all the languages of the people, Estevanico for the Spanish. How the hell does this Moor know how to talk to these people in Mexico and in Arizona and New Mexico and California? The language had to have been something he was familiar with. That's stuff I grew up knowing that Estevanico, little Stephen, was the interpreter. Why did Columbus have these Moors on the ship to do the translation? How did these people get to talk to each other if there wasn't some similarity? So there's a major fraud in the story of Columbus. And so he found this. We were already here. You can go to Rock Lake, Wisconsin, and you have pyramids built by somebody underwater. and the white folk didn't build them. The Smithsonian has destroyed skeletons and other things, all kinds of stuff that's here. The mound builders, for example, East St. Louis, Cahokia, they don't know who built the mounds. Come on, test the bones. They tested for everything else. If they thought the people were rapists or thieves at the mound, they would dig, especially if they could put it on black folks. But if they're the ones that built all this stuff, if Hernan de Soto, who killed hundreds, if not tens of thousands of people who didn't look white, who were they? I mean, if we can go on and on. If you look at the jewelry of the Hopi and the Navajo, and you compare that to what the Fulani and other nomadic people have in the Sahel, a lot of the stuff looks almost the same. If you go to Senegal, they've got all the silver. When you go to New Mexico, what do they work with? Silver. The stuff looks very similar. Normally, when a lot of stuff is similar, you look to see how it comes together. When it points back to Africa, we don't know where it came from. We don't know who built Great Zimbabwe. Maybe the Phoenicians, maybe the extraterrestrials built this. No one black did it. It's the same scam that niggers never did anything except after we enslaved and civilized them. And ADOS and Skip Gates and others are bringing a fraudulent history. For example, you've been to my house, you've seen the picture of my great-grandmother. My great-grandmother spoke the language. My great-grandmother was a medicine woman from her tribe. And we've been here for thousands of years. But when you test my DNA, it all comes up African, even though they ate deer meat and would use deer skin to do their hair and all this stuff. You mean I have to pretend that that's not true to fit this slave ship thing?
Okay.
They can't, the numbers don't match for the slave ships and all this stuff. This stuff is what we've been fed instead of what they've documented. And why would we, the same folks who've enslaved, segregated, killed us, given us token integration, dumped the drugs in our neighborhood, done mass incarceration, now we're going to let them tell us what history is?
Okay, Randy. ADOS isn't the first reparations movement. There was one called In Cobra, I believe.
And even before this reparations issue, there's a sister that was pushing for reparations right after the Civil War. There have been discussions of reparations going all the way back to the foundation of this country. What do we do with these people? And by the way, let me just say this. There's a guy by the name of William Plecker. 116 years ago, 106 years ago, he came up with the idea in Virginia, where I have a lot of family from, and a lot of folks in my family are Blackfoot Indian and other. Everybody that was Negro, in fact, Negro historically going all the way back, and I had family in Jamestown. I have DNA proof for that. You had people that were Negro, that was inclusive of the indigenous people that were here and the Africans that were brought over. That was so from the 1600s until 1913, when this white racist man decided to say all the Indians were dead and everybody that wasn't white was black. And this was a way to steal land, which it's all about. It's about land and resources. So our history has to be contaminated to justify the theft of our land, labor, our history, and everything else, and to get us to go along with it. And so they give us this xenophobic, quack historical movement that speaks to legitimate things, but it's a poison pill inside of a poison pill. Yes, I believe in there being an African or indigenous American identity, but I can't lie to you if I tell you that my family came from Haiti. My family came from Jamaica, right? And recent times, within 190 years ago, when my family fled Haiti because the United States let the French put an embargo and blockade on Haiti, forced the people who had fled here, who were Indian and black, they had to come back. So I don't have an animosity against Haitians. I got Jamaican roots. We're more complex than how this ADOS paradigm works, and literally what it demands is that we have to cannibalize and mutilate our own identity to get a check cut. I want the check, and I want my full identity on my
Why
terms.
haven't we gotten the check?
Because we haven't demanded and we haven't acted. You know, we don't say what we mean and mean what we say.
But wait, though. We were supposed to get 40 acres and a mule. Why didn't we get that?
We didn't get 40 acres and a mule. I remember a book that's called, I believe, Branches Without Roots. It was a book that I had when I was at the University of Virginia. And there was a congressional discussion about reparations and so forth. And the main reason that they couldn't support the Standing Order 40, the words stand out, I'll never forget it. If we give them this, we'll create a Negro republic in our South.
I believe the reason why we never got the 40 acres and a mule is the same reason we'll never get reparations. Because once we become economically empowered, we no longer are that permanent underclass that's needed to keep the white poor in line, because they're in line as long as they have somebody to feel better than. And if we are freed, it threatens the whole system. If we become more successful than them, then the white elite has a problem.
We're already more successful than them. This is why the white elite has always had a problem, and they can't. Thomas Jefferson described as, we have a wolf by the ears. The police have to keep killing, and they have to keep doing mass incarceration because, let's be honest with each other, if you look at the history of this group, I don't like the term, but white trash, these are people who were misfits, who were ne'er-do-wells, who never could cut it where they came from. And no matter how much privilege and opportunity has been dumped on them to make them better than black people, it's failed because you can't make a purse out of a pig's ear. So in other words, the black people, take for instance, Frederick Douglass was managed by white trash, the man he fought with, Mr. Covey, and he beat him up. If there's greatness in all people, and there is, the greatness in black people can't be checked permanently by white privilege. That's the reason that the drugs, that's the reason that you have to push pedophilia, that's the reason that you have to buy off the black churches and you have to make the black women men and black men women and make black children seniors and make seniors children. You have to do that to prevent the emergence of what is inevitable, because if it was great, it will rise. So poor white people aren't really the problem. In fact, if black people were smarter, if reparations were a reality off of the one-drop rule, like what's happening in Brazil, every year in Brazil, more and more people are declaring themselves black. Okay, in 2015, blacks suddenly were 51% of the population. Each year, the number of people, when they realize they're never going to be white and the country's going to eventually, one day, have a super black majority where they won't be able to deny it, they want to be on the winning side, even if it's subconscious. We have maybe 100 million people who are passing for something that they're not. Okay?
In America?
In America, there are millions of people who aren't really white, but we haven't.
How do you define whiteness or blackness?
Well,
if they can pass for white, to me, that sounds like they're pretty much white.
It says they're pretty much white until you do a DNA test. You're pretty much white until the rubber hits the road. If you look at where, a lot of these
came out of Africa, so shouldn't everyone have some African DNA? How do you justify the designation that they're passing for white and they're not black?
There are lots of people who aren't really white that are like in your face. People like, not that I worship him, Elvis Presley, Clark Gable, Ava Gardner, Tom Hanks.
Those people are black.
They're not white people, and
why
so
aren't they white people? How do
they aren't white people by their genetics. They're not white. And Clark Gable, and for that matter, the president, when this book was published, Warren G. Harding, He didn't tell you he was all white. He knew he had black. So
Was
what?
Adam Clayton Powell black?
Yeah, absolutely. And Adam Clayton Powell's father and the grandfather,
See,
and the
that to
people.
me, that we're getting into this murky space now because
It's not murky.
Adam Clayton Powell,
Mhm.
okay, just like let's say Rock Newman, or and there's so many others who they look to be more white than black.
Mhm.
How do you determine what's black and what's white? Isn't it kind of an ambiguous type of
No,
thing?
I
Race,
think
isn't race kind of ambiguous to begin with?
race is an invented concept, but ethnicity is not. Rock Newman, my father married Rock Newman, his wife, so I'm not going to say anything bad about Rock Newman. Rock
Well, I'm
Newman
not
used to
saying anything
visit
bad
my
about him,
house,
but
and
the
Rock
brother's
Newman.
almost white as the page
Rock,
loose leaf.
Rock Newman is connected to the Swanson Project. So Rock Newman is more than likely a cousin of mine. So that's what a lot of the family looks like. And the thing that I find impressive doing genealogical research, up until the people in my family moved to D.C. in 1860 or 1850 and couldn't get any opportunities, no one ever identified as white. They did it for a couple years to get access. As soon as they got access, they went back to calling themselves mixed or colored or Negro. Um, because, like, there's a gentleman I want you to interview, my cousin Matthew Fogg, who looks like a mulatto Matt Damon. Matthew's family, part of my family, probably related to Rock Newman. They all went up to New England to live as white people because, see, it's more than skin color. And they couldn't handle it. They didn't like the food. They didn't like the music.
But let me ask you
But
something.
let me finish. And eventually, somebody, I think, may have heard the N word one time too many and snapped, tried to kill someone white because they couldn't take lying about who they actually were.
Yeah.
And the family had to move back down. And you know what people in my family did? You saw the picture of my house. Everybody started marrying Wesley Snipes colored people because they didn't want. I don't want you to look at me and not know I'm a black person. I'm going to marry. I'm going to breed out the white look because that's the result in many instances of force, of rape, of breeding without people's choice. So to me, and I'll stop here. A lot of what makes you a black American or however African American, whatever you want to call, is a shared experience of dealing with racism and justice in the United States.
I agree with that. But now you bring something else to mind. Why is it so many prominent black people in history are either very light complexioned or of mixed heritage? Is there some sort of is there some sort of preference for blacks, like Cory Booker and so on and so forth?
Well, we've got a self-hatred problem off the chain in our community. Look at how long Venus and Serena had to win before Essence or Ebony would put them on the cover. I don't know if you recall, black folks had to picket Ebony to demand black-looking people on the cover. And Mr. Johnson wasn't a light-skinned man. We've internalized white supremacy. In fact, we're the best practitioners of white supremacy are self-hating Negroes. Our biggest enemy are those who accept white as being better. I think many white folks like the privilege of whiteness, but are less supremacist than many of the black people we meet. I told you, I was in the National Archives, the people who made me feel most unwelcome when I first got in the building were the black folks there. Like, what are you doing here? White folk are surveilling. Maybe they don't like black people, but, they did their job. We collectively have to stop hating our own guts. In fact, that's the reparations that we must start. The beginning of reparations is what we will do for one another. You set up this studio, you rent this. Even though I had an opportunity to get some money, I told you I'll be here within 10 minutes. I won't let you down. You opened the door for me as a brother. I was here at 2:08. I would have been here at 2:06 had I caught another cab. Your money, you put a chance on me. I don't want to fail you. we must begin to incentivize what it means to be this so-called black thing, a sense of belonging, a set of rules, laws, codes, and things that we conform to that would make us very powerful as a people. We must have that. This is lacking largely because we have all of these mixed race or folk who want to pass, or we have an impulse towards assimilation because black isn't good enough. That is not my feeling. As I said to you, the people in my family that could pass for white refused. They all, like I said, deliberately married darker skinned people. My grandfather married the darkest woman out of cotton fields he could get, and he would parade around to prove he could have a baby darker than him. Okay.
So it's the opposite today, huh? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm thinking that when the Black Pride movement, we had Black Pride for a couple of years, and it got destroyed as soon as it came out with Superfly, with O'Neal with this long, relaxed hair, and then light skin came back in. But for about 5-6 years, black people were proud. Then we went back to black
Say it
being
loud,
ugly.
I'm black and I'm proud.
And black
yeah.
has been ugly from the early 70s to now. We have not had a movement to feel good about ourselves, and that's not just on us.
Is that the white man's responsibility to make us feel good about ourselves?
But no, it isn't. But it also is a white man's crime to participate in the denigration of a people's sense of worth. In fact, that's a violation of the International Convention Against Genocide. So if let's say the group has low self-esteem, but if you come in and you contribute to it, it's the same way we have drug users, but who's bringing the drugs in? Even though we're selling, who's the wholesaler, right? We have shootings, but who's bringing the guns in? We have a compounded problem, and we have to cut out our crap first, and then we can stop the other crap from happening.
Let me be the devil's advocate here.
Mm-hmm. You're
All
good
right.
at that.
Okay. No, we don't bring the drugs in. But do we have to sell it to each other, though? No, we don't bring the guns in.
No.
But do we have to shoot each other at such an alarming rate?
I'm with the look.
Yo,
I wrote,
my thing with all of that kind of talk, Randy, is that no matter how true it is or isn't, right? It doesn't negate our own obligation and responsibility to ourselves.
And what am I saying that
Yeah,
you're not getting? Where I'm not saying that we
yeah,
are
but-
responsible.
But we got to put that out there too,
I-
because a
I
lot of
did.
people will just hold on to the fact that
I
we
did.
don't do this because we owe it to ourselves because nobody can treat us better
Than what we do.
Than we
Look,
treat
I
ourselves.
wrote a poem
If
when
we do ourselves dirty, why would we expect the next man to treat us
I
any
agree.
better?
I wrote a poem called "The White Man's Fault" when I was a student at Howard, and I don't know where it is because I lost my storage unit, but I'll never forget the line I wrote. I get as much death as I can, blaming it on the white man. And so, absolutely, I'm responsible, right? And we have to be responsible. This is what I'm talking about: reciprocity, code, rules, so forth. You know, you shouldn't be able. Let's take the city of D.C. They want to knock down 7 housing projects, but these people, a black government, had thousands of people live in buildings, and they used lead paint decades after lead paint had been outlawed. Now, they've destroyed generations of people.
Is there proof of this?
Yes. I mean, I got it in my computer. And so what are they going to do? We have our little lesbian mayor. I mean,
We don't know that.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we do. I mean, and she's as white in her mind as the pearls on her neck of the picture I saw in the taxi coming over here. Okay. These folks, what they're going to do is instead of provide reparations and they have the money, find out who has blood lead poisoning and what can be done to get these people. In fact, is there anyone in D.C. jail who's lead poisoned? Anyone that's been a criminal? Have they been poisoned? Let's heal these people and stop doing to them what the largest society does. Not, do I like black murders? No. Do I like black rapists? No. I'm a death penalty person from way back. To me, string them all up and cut the garbage. But for those people who've been broken, who've been violated, who've been injured, give them the opportunity, work with them. And we need to do this amongst ourselves. So mind you, I'm nationalistic. People keep thinking I heard I was a right-wing radio show host. No, I've got these books, James Warden Johnson. I got Kelly Miller. I've been doing research on Nannie Helen Burroughs about what we can do for ourselves is the most important thing. In fact, no one can wipe your behind better than you can. Nobody can brush your teeth better than you can. Nobody can comb your hair. Now, maybe you can cut your hair better than a barber, but most of the key things that we have to do, whether it's feed ourselves, it has to be what we feel for self. In fact, ADOS, what it fails at as a movement is it does not generate self-respect, self-love, mutual responsibility, mutual protection. It does not build up a commonwealth and a common will for us to move forward. Instead of being mad at poor white people or even immigrants of other groups, we're mad at black immigrants. This isn't satisfactory to me, even though I've had some very negative experiences with black folks who've come here internationally. If it's not teaching us to love self, it's not anti-abortion, it's not pro-family, it's against the LGBTQ madness and so forth, then it is useless. If it does not clean us up from the inside to empower us to get the check cut, it's got a problem.
Well, let me tell you my problem with ADOS, and it's not even a big problem. I'm a realist, right? And I'm practical. And as we discussed earlier, there was a reason why we weren't given 40 acres and a mule. And I don't think that reason has changed. I think all of this talk of reparations, whether we deserve it or not, is not even an issue. I don't think we're going to get it. That's just me. I'm not discouraging people from fighting for reparations, not at all. I would just rather use my energy and resources somewhere else where I feel like I have a better chance of seeing results. I don't believe it's ever going to happen for the same reasons the 40 acres and a mule didn't happen. And I could be wrong because I don't know everything. But that's just simply my position. And trust me, if my check came in the mail, I would cash it. You know what I mean?
And if you spend it on weed, it would be your business.
Look,
okay?
Look, but that's my thing. But since we were talking about blacks passing, collaborators, self-hatred, we have an elite group of blacks like there's an elite group of whites in this country. And in America, they're called the Black Boule, which is like a lower house in the Greek parliament and or the Greek Senate, I believe, or whatever. And that's why they call themselves Greeks and so on and so forth. And the Boule, from my research, was formed in 1904 by Dr. Henry Minton in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. What is the role of the Boule and how have they helped or hurt black Americans? Because they are supposed to be our brightest and our best. What have they done to hinder or help us?
If you're not moving towards lifting up the masses of the people, you're a problem, okay? The Boule is like, wow. It would be like AIDS, hepatitis C, septic gonorrhea, and pancreatic cancer all at the same time, the black body.
Why would you say that?
Because if you look at anything that they touch, they destroy.
Give me an example.
Our HBCUs, the black church, black communities, black business, black movements. The Boule's job is a lot like...
But black people supposedly have $1 trillion in spending money.
Yeah, well,
I heard someone say...
But if you're giving $1 trillion to someone that wants to mass incarcerate you and put fluoride and lead in your water and sterilize your girls and make you homeless and bring in 50 million people to replace you, you won't have that trillion that long.
And you're saying... the Boules are co-conspirators in this conspiracy against black people?
If you've read Uncle Tom's Cabin, whereas I had an ancestor that lived from 1769 until 1831. I don't know if he got killed due to Nat Turner's revolt. His name was Sambo. So I'm very careful. I don't like to use the name Sambo negatively because that's one of my ancestors somehow from Senegambia. But in the book, You have Kimbrough and Sambro. These are the slave drivers, alongside the hated slave driver Simon Legree. He had two blacks that drove and destroyed and raped and ripped up the people on the plantation. And the Boule and the NAACP and the Congressional Black Caucus, the Greeks, the Masons, anybody, and in particular, Coon preachers, are our equivalent of Sambo and Kimbrough, and they're making black people's lives all the more miserable.
Explain how the boule actually works on an elementary level.
On an elementary
that,
level,
that babies could understand.
effectively, the boule is like the elite families or persons that join the elite, usually by going to an HBCU. The people they join one of the Divine Nine, and I guess through lots of very strange acts and so forth, they become people committed. Because this boule, these Greek groups, no disrespect, they're like little religious cults. They have each Greek group has a god that they pray to. As a Christian, thou shalt have no other god before me. It's the first commandment. So these people are paganistic people who only exist to help those who are in these key little league Masonic groups, because they feed into the Masons when they move on a lot of the times. Their job is to only help themselves and to be helpers of white supremacy. That's what they do. And if you look, and let me give you, because hating black folks is so much fun. I'll give you a good example. In the 1600s, and maybe between 1630 and 1650, there was supposed to be a major Negro, which means African and Indian, revolt against white people. And somebody snitched, and that person became, I believe, the equivalent of a millionaire. And so black success, if I can use the term, normally means that you betray the masses for you to get yours. They don't mind individuals having, but they don't want the greatest number of blacks benefiting, and the boule operates the same way. I can give you a fundamental example. The Civil Rights Movement, okay,
was Dr. King boule?
Dr. King ended up being destroyed. He was like,
but was he boule? He was an alpha.
yes,
was he not?
he's and his father and all of them. They're
thank
boule.
you.
But what Dr. King, he in British colonialism, they called it going native. Mm-hmm. Going native is when they send you to Africa and you end up falling in love with the people and going against. All right, Dr. King went native on the boule, and they basically let the government know that he could be murdered. Okay, this happens when certain black people wake up and realize that they're against the masses. They have to be destroyed, and black people.
So I call it going rogue. Dr. King went rogue, and that's why
Dr.
he was
King
killed.
went native because Dr. King, what did he do? He wanted to help the black people emptying the trash. And if I were to tell you, I'll give you a quick story. The nephew of the former President Howard, what's this man's name? The one who, he's gay, and he and his wife would fight in the emergency room at the Howard Hotel. Cheek.
Wait, hold up. You said he's gay.
He's deceased. He was gay.
And his wife.
He was because he would fight with.
Well, how did he have a wife? Are you talking about a man who was
This
his
is
wife,
part of the boule thing. There's
Okay.
a lot of sexual confusion, and that's part of how people inducted. They do a lot of odd stuff in these groups. It's awful. What I'm saying is the president would constantly cheat on his wife with the chauffeurs on the staff of Howard. And they would fight in the emergency room, and he'd have to go in and get eye surgery because she'd punch him in the eye. This is real talk. And how they solved that was they gave him female chauffeurs, because if you put a woman in the car,
they were safe.
Yes, he wouldn't bother them. So now one of his nephews came up to me at 7th and Berry Place one day and said, "Short, come here." And it says, "Who do you think you are?" I says, "What are you talking about?" The way that, because I would write for the school paper and I'd say stuff. It says, "The way you put us down and you're comparing us." This is comparing to what? The way you criticize, because I'd criticize stuff that the boule folk were doing. And I says, "I don't compare Howard to Harvard. I compare Howard to Howard. Howard could do better with what it has." That's not an attack on Howard. If you're a track coach and someone could take a few seconds off their sprint, that's not an attack. I'm telling you how to be a winner. You're saying I can't quit. Let me tell you, he says, well, you can't do that. You're supposed to be one of us. And how dare you talk about poor people like you've been poor? I mean, this is a real conversation. And I says, what do you mean one of us? What's us? You know. So in other words, it's presumed I'm supposed to join the group of blacks that are like the house Negroes, or as Malcolm X said, house niggers, who hold the masses down so they are a little bit better, have a little bit better food, nicer clothes, whatever, while the majority suffer. This is what we have in this country. And I'm a poor person because I've refused to do that. I don't want to hurt other black people.
I'm gonna say this, right. As far as the boule and the black elite, I believe the things that you just described, but I also think the problem is more pervasive, and it maybe started with them. They may have set the standard, but now it's everywhere. What I know.
I don't disagree with that, but it says
look,
it starts from the head.
yeah,
It rots, which means
we
that they could provide leadership
in good ways, and they have done it in bad. But let me finish though.
Shoot.
Look, it seems to me that whenever a black man wants to make money, or even a black woman, the easiest way for us to make money is at each other's expense. That's what I'm talking about, the guy that sold
out.
That's why I brought it up.
Yes, that's success.
I'm
hurting, destroying other black people is success.
Whether it be selling drugs,
pimping, fake preachers,
even rapping, the message that's being promoted of black people to black people.
Yes.
We are constantly being rewarded to indulge in the self-destruction of our own people.
And abortion and so forth.
And everything. And people really don't get that. The ones who make the most money.
I think they get it, but you see, we're very hedonistic, and that's where the boule comes in, of saying hedonism is good, whether it's Ebony Magazine, whether it's even the church, even if I'm the biggest drug dealer, if I put a pile of dollars in the plate, and the woman that scrubs hotel rooms. I want
to share something that the listeners could really relate to, because you're very educated and well-read, and maybe not everybody is going to connect with everything that you say. So I want to give something that I know they'll connect with. I used to promote parties and get sponsors and so on. And you know who the sponsor was always be? Liquor or tobacco companies.
Right, exactly.
You see what I'm saying?
They're the same ones but they're the same ones that would buy an Ebony and Jet.
Yeah, it's always
but it's
something
because
like
black death and black suffering is a profit center in America. So boxing, blacks aren't in crew. They tend to be in the sports where, you sustain injury and are shorter. But remember I said we have to incentivize who and what we are. We have to change that, because there are ways to do that. But you know what? It may require sacrifice.
Oh, it's definitely going to require sacrifice. Everybody's not ready for that.
But we want it.
We want it now, we're not thinking about our kids or our grandkids. We want it now, right now, and we don't care how we get it.
And that's the same thing for sex. That's the same thing for a car. So as a result, the bad parasuicidal choices that we make across the board have us entrapped by this. We can't even get to racism. I mean, racism is out there, and it's doing all that. But what we have, and that's why I said to you, reparation starts with us. You open the door for me to come here and meet with you, even though someone's offering me some money. I says, I'm going to come. If you invest in me, I have to invest in you. You get where I'm coming from? What the transatlantic slave trade did was we stopped trading with each other. It wasn't about what we could do for one another. We ended up guns, liquor, raping one another. And we have to break the cycle of self-hatred and suicidality and move somewhere else. And when we do, which is why there's so much resistance to Black history and other things that will get people to think. That's why even among the Boule, what I was going to say to you is the black movement in this country was strongest when the Greeks and the other people were unpopular. The Greeks came back. I was on campus. I saw it. The Greeks came back in the 80s, but they were run off or they were forced to join the movement. I got a call from someone up in New York. You probably know him. His name is Brother Leroy Baylor. He does a lot of radio and stuff. Leroy called me because a guy by the name of Ralph Featherstone in the 60s went and begged the people in his fraternity to join the civil rights movement, and they said thumbs down. Ralph Featherstone was blown up with a car bomb in the 60s. He's a classmate of my mother from Dunbar. And these brothers, but they left him to die.
Let me ask you this. Do you think every member of a black Greek organization is aware of what they're partaking in, or are only certain people provided the information? Because I've seen Roland Martin on the Breakfast Club announce that he's Boule.
Sure.
Me personally, I
think
think anybody who's going around saying they're Boule is probably not a high-ranking Boule. That's just my thoughts.
I don't care if they're Boule wannabe, their problem. But the way I see it is, if someone said, we're going to see some girls, and it turns out to be a gang rape, you're just as guilty as the person that initiated if you go along. Okay? Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, all of our great people, Harriet Tubman, greatness meaning you go against the crowd, because the crowd tends to go towards black self-hatred and white supremacy, their white supremacy helping aids. You've got to go alone. And if enough of us stood, other people would come our way. The problem is because we have such a sense of alienation, and we've made popularity and being somehow connected more important than the principle, because we're not ethical and we're not principled, because that doesn't work for us, so we believe. And there's a reason this country is hypocritical and dishonest about most things. But how we deal with each other, it's not, in the short term, beneficial for many people who don't have the morals and values. So as a result, fewer people take the path they need to, but everyone black that's ever been great did not run with the crowd. You get the crowd to come with you. We who think have to hijack the black community. The Boule is defeatable. My dream right now is to work with some other activists so we can get the NAACP stripped of its tax-exempt status. We have to go to war with the Boule. That would just make me feel so good.
Are the Boule responsible for Baltimore?
Yes, actually, yes.
How so?
Well, let me give you an example.
Because Baltimore's been in the news lately. Mm-hmm. Trump has been tweeting about Baltimore. Mm-hmm. He's feuding with Elijah Cummings, and I see some people on social media showing all the rats in Baltimore. Trump says that the conditions at the border camps are actually better than the conditions in Baltimore.
Maybe better than some of the homeless shelters that the city provides. That might be true. And then for people who are living in abandoned buildings, it's probably true. And so I would say that, and relatively speaking, those are people who are trying to invade the country. How could U.S. citizens live similar to or worse than invaders in an internment place?
How did the Boule play a role in this specifically? Let's help people understand.
Okay,
this.
I'll share with you how the Boule is doing it. There is a white man by the name of Mike Miller. Mike Miller has been the Maryland Senate president since the mid-'80s. Mike Miller is a great-grandson of Mary Surratt, the woman who had Abraham Lincoln shot in the head, because he announced on April 9th, 1865 that blacks are going to get the right to vote. So this
Are you sure he's related to this woman?
Absolutely. So this
I don't know anything about this.
I'm saying it's true. I don't care. It's a fact. Mike Miller runs the Democratic Party. Mike Miller has pushed pedophilia, school closings, jails, gambling.
Pedophilia is illegal. Why isn't he not in jail?
What I mean by pushing it is that they've pushed the gay agenda. they've pushed for this
Is
equality
Mike
stuff.
Miller black?
No, Mike Miller is white. But
So
hold on,
let's get to the boule
hold it,
now.
hold it. But the boule, the blacks that are in the Maryland Assembly and all of that, the boule types, Jack and Jill types, all do whatever Mike Miller tells them to do. They never rebel or disobey. And so Mike Miller, when they could have been building schools in Baltimore, dealing with lead poisoning in Baltimore, if Mike Miller and them say no, they don't get it. And it goes on and on. So the black folks in the Democratic Party, which was the party of segregation and black oppression in Maryland, as bad as the Republicans were, all the civil rights laws that sort of made Maryland a little better were passed by ultra-conservative Republicans like Governor Agnew. And the spiritual father of of Maryland's Democrats is Nancy Pelosi's dad, Thomas D'Alessandro, the last openly segregationist mayor of Baltimore, who, by the way, worked with the mafia when the narcotics began to come in.
And this is Nancy Pelosi.
Nancy Pelosi's dad. And then her
And he
brother.
was a segregationist.
Yes, he was a segregationist. And her
And
brother.
he worked with the mafia.
Yes. And her brother was a neo-segregationist.
Where can we find this information?
There's a
Short?
really good book called Not in My Neighborhood by Pitella, but it's very easy. D'Alessandro. Now, she moved to Baltimore. She moved from Baltimore to California to clean up her name. Her father was so crooked he couldn't run to be governor of Maryland. So there's a mafia connection. So the drugs that you see in Baltimore, the seeds were sown by Nancy Pelosi, whose Ace Boone Coon slave running dog, Elijah Cummings. Okay, these people allowed this to happen. And I want to mention this because her
These
brother.
are some serious
I don't
allegations.
care. It's true. Look, there was a group called Black October in Baltimore. Have you ever heard of them?
Yes.
Do you know Black October wanted to get rid of drugs in Baltimore? You know that, right?
Yes.
You know the boule and the mafia and the FBI all got together to crush Black October. Okay, and who was mayor when Black October got taken down? Roosevelt D'Alessandro, a man accused of gang raping possibly 2 black girls with 14 other people in 1953, Nancy Pelosi's brother. This stuff has been...
That's Nancy Pelosi's brother?
That's Nancy Pelosi's brother, was accused, and because his father was mayor, the charges, they were able, although there's a very crooked...
But Nancy Pelosi loves black people.
Really? How are black people living in San Francisco? They're living in feces or doo-doo or the S word and dope needles. Black folks used to be almost 20% of the population of San Francisco. They may be 2-3%. The
I
police,
was told maybe less.
Yeah, and so the black folks are homeless, they're broke, they're destroyed. Nancy Pelosi is the most wicked white woman to ever impact black folks. I mean,
More than Hillary?
all the white women that scream rape that got black men lynched can't be as evil as Nancy Pelosi is. That's how I feel about it. Nancy Pelosi is a cancer. The Congressional Black Caucus had a little bit of testicles when she came in, and she just cut it off. She's probably working on the prepuce of the other thing. Now they just snip, snip, snip. The longer she's there, she just keeps cutting it off. I mean, I'm tight with Cynthia McKinney. And I'm going to paraphrase. Cynthia McKinney said to me in so many ways that Nancy Pelosi threatened the Congressional Black Caucus not to do anything about Katrina. Just leave that alone. So let the people there die. Let the alligators eat them. Let them get shot in Gretna. We don't want to lose the House. All of those folks sat back and let that happen.
We've said a lot of very controversial things.
Sure, I did.
You've said a lot of very controversial things.
I don't care. It's true.
Now, we got to be able to prove these things.
We
can't
can,
just
we,
throw
we,
things
no,
out there
we
like
can
that.
prove that.
Because you know what? White racists go on podcasts and talk shows, and they say very controversial things about us that are unsubstantiated.
You can look up D'Alessandro. You can look up that stuff. That's a fact. You can also look up the fact the Congressional Black Caucus, with the exception of Cynthia McKinney, who had the 3 or 4 black women, one of them, Mama D, who died in 2017 or 18, who's a leader in New Orleans, a friend of mine. Nobody's done anything really about New Orleans. In fact, Boule, the woman who has water poison in Flint, I think she's AKA or she's a Delta. That's a Boule
Does
hit.
that automatically make her Boule?
As far as I'm concerned, act like a boule, black folks suffer like it's boule, black folks being destroyed is a boule. I'm going to put you in it, okay?
But back to Baltimore. Are you saying Nancy Pelosi, directly through Elijah Cummings, undermined Baltimore?
No, I'm saying that they laid the foundation. If you read the book Not My Community, it talks about it's a Jewish man who worked with D'Alessandro, who was a mafia boss, to make certain that Baltimore stayed segregated, that black people didn't get opportunities. And this laid the foundation. But if they're connected with the drugs that have come in, which is still a problem there, right? They've laid a lot of the foundation for the mass suffering and the deindustrialization. And Mike Miller and all these other folks have worked together, okay, to not help blacks. It's the same way all the cities are being starved.
You're not just saying that they're connected to the mob because they're ethnically Italian, are you?
No, but he was. D'Alessandro could not run to be
Governor.
because he was so corrupted.
He was mayor, though.
For 12 years.
Okay.
From like 47
And that
to
is Nancy Pelosi's
dad. And then her brother was in from like 68 to 72 or 7. So, I mean.
And he was accused of.
He wasn't accused, but he was there cracking heads when the King riots happened. So a lot of what happened to Baltimore, you have to understand, Baltimore has two sets of enemies. Like you have a corruption now, a lot of corrupt black cops who plant guns and shoot people and so forth. You got lead in the water everywhere. When they were doing the enterprise zones, and where was Elijah Cummings when all the money disappeared? Not one hearing. Okay, that corrupt mayor, the one that went out, her name is Pugh, and boy, did she stink. I mean, you have these people who are black, who are in positions who don't do. I claim Freddie Gray as a cousin because I have family from all over named Gray. We even look a little alike. He had lead poisoning, and he was killed. Okay, and everybody got off. Now, you know, Mike Miller tried to move that trial to Eastern Shore. And when I tried to get the information off the internet, to get it on WOL, they scrubbed the internet so people couldn't come after, because there's this Knights of Columbus thing that Mike Miller's on the board of, and all this stuff. This is some heavy Catholic, Democratic corruption stuff. In fact, Mike Miller's folks were involved in illegal sale of alcohol because they have that store down in Maryland. That store has been selling alcohol from 1913 to the present, which means throughout the entire Prohibition, these folks are selling alcohol. You've got a mafia connection, and that is the most powerful man in the state. Everybody, including Elijah Cummings, kiss his ring no matter what bad happens to black people. And a lot of them that live in Prince George's County, the ones that hate D.C. people, and they're so snooty because they've got 2 or 3 acres of land and so forth. And they got multiple cars in their garage. These folks who hate Marion Barry, who made them rich, at the end of the day, they're all slaves to a man who's a descendant of someone who had Lincoln shot and killed. And all of them, like the Deltas and all of them that are in the Democratic Party,
of it all.
they all run after Mike Miller. The Deltas, the AKAs, the Qs, if they're connected to the Democratic Party in Maryland, the Boule folks dominate, or the Masonic people, and they keep black folks down.
This is all interesting stuff, Randy, but we got to wrap it up, and I just want to know quickly from you, where do black people go from here? What is the first step and how? I don't believe in any one leader or anything like that, but I believe in a common idea and ambition. Where do we go from here?
You're asking me to have all the pages in a book.
Just the first step. What do we do?
Well, first step for we, that's difficult for all. But if you were to make a if I were to make a recommendation for what someone black could do is find out who you are. Go down, look up your ancestors' National Archives. Take some time to know who your people are, and then find 2 or 3 other thinking people and look at what you could do with any youth, any seniors, and find a place where there are other people that you can talk to and think about something as basic as having a garden or a reading program or have a discussion on books or an investment program. I mean, find those that want to. Most black folks, no disrespect, we're going to lose large numbers of people because of the things stacked against us. But if a remnant of us come together and work, we'll be like yeast and bread. We can make the whole thing rise.
So essentially, the first rule is to know thyself.
Know thyself, know thy God, know thy friends, and in particular, know thy enemies and be prepared to fight them, both internal and external. And the thing I'll tell folks is if you get the coons out of your life, everything else is easy.
Thank you, Randy.
Okay.